Welcome to another rousing episode of What the Fuck Is This with your favorite hypnotherapist and licensed mental health counselor. Today, I'm going to introduce you to Bashar.
When you do get a picture in your imagination of who you prefer to be, what you prefer to be doing, where you prefer to be doing it, how you prefer to be doing it, when you see that, all you really have to do is mimic it, mirror it, act it out.
What's going on, everyone? I get a lot of questions because I am the resident dream interpreter on the internet about channeling, about alternate dimensions, about astral travel. And you know, I'm a scientist, number one. But I get a lot of stuff sent to me by people being like, well, this person's channeling this person named Bashar, and there's this guy named Daryl, and he's saying these things about the future. And I take a pretty skeptical view of these things, but let's look into it, and I'll give you my opinion of what I think is happening, and I'm curious to start a conversation below about what you think is happening. So let me just show you what this kind of is here. So this is a gentleman named Daryl, and Daryl, we'll get into Daryl's story here in a minute, but he channels an alien entity named Bashar that he says, well, I'm just going to let him explain it, that he says is actually his future self from an alternate dimension and like is an alien. Here's what he's got to say. He introduced it better than I can.
Seeing Bashar for the first time.
I am seeing Bashar for the first time. Yes.
Thank you for coming.
I'm glad to be here.
Where'd y'all come from?
Maybe non-consensual.
All of a sudden, out of the woodwork. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Because there
prep.
are a lot of new people here.
You got to loosen the pipeways for Bashar, you know what I'm saying?
Let me just do a very, very brief explanation of what's going on here.
Floor is yours, Daryl.
Bashar, I'm sure, is there anyone here who's not even familiar with what channeling is? Okay,
a little bit.
That saves me a little bit of explaining. Bashar presents himself as an extraterrestrial entity. They have a civilization in a slightly altered dimension. They do have a physicality, but they're evolving into a more non-physical form. But this sort of came about as a result of...
Is there the opportunity for me to evolve into a non-physical form? Because I'll be honest, waking up out of bed, the knees and the back, if I could lose those...
2 broad daylight, very close UFO sightings I had here in LA 30 years ago. That started me on an investigative path to find...
Man, imagine seeing a UFO 30 years ago and then dedicating yourself to channeling Bashar. I mean, I'm not knocking it. I just think it's impressive. Like, I can't focus for 10 minutes.
Find out what UFOs and metaphysical things were all about. Eventually, that path led me to discover channeling coming through another channel, and eventually the entity through that channel offered to teach channeling for whoever is interested. And I went into the class just as part of my research, but found out to my surprise while in the class that I received a telepathic connection that opened up a memory of having made an agreement to do this in this life.
So my understanding of channeling is that you open up yourself to receive a message from another entity, usually like a UFO, extraterrestrial, and then you speak those things by being the conduit, being the channel for this other entity's voice. Tell me if I'm right or wrong in that.
With Bashar, who has described himself as my future self.
Did we ask the pronouns? I think it's important.
And in some sense, therefore, I'm his past self on this planet. And in there...
Wouldn't we have transcended his and hers at that point? Like, I mean, we're already getting there, and I'm a big fan of it, but...
Their world, time is not what it is to us, so they have the ability to sort of connect with me as his past self, and when my brainwaves link with his, you get a translation of his thoughts into the language, obviously, that I was raised to understand.
Do you think they have to schedule these with Bashar? Like, is Bashar outside of time? And like they have to schedule like, hey, you know, like we've got that, don't forget, we've got that Saturday afternoon lecture that we're doing. So I'm going to need you to be aware, be awake, you know, to kind of lay off the extraterrestrial booze the night before so we can have this conversation on Saturday. You're going to make me look like an absolute idiot if you don't show up.
And he delivers whatever he feels is the most important and pertinent information at this point. So how many...
Okay. So there's more to it. So Daryl actually goes and gets an EEG done on his brain to try and demonstrate that there is some scientific validity to channeling. And this is where I have my own opinions, but I'll let the video play.
And harmonize.
You can see it's by a channel called Soul Healing Hypnosis, which I should probably follow actually.
When they do, my body becomes like a biological resonator, and my personality starts to mirror his.
looking up here, we can see that each of the electrodes that we have hooked up on that cap have achieved a level of impedance that is accurate and that will properly record the brainwaves without interference.
Very cool image on the side there of that little like pulsating brain. Oh.
In the beginning of the channeling, the channel was capable of holding on to, shall we say, or bringing through the idea of about 1.5 to 2% of our energy. In the ensuing years following the initiation of contact with the channel, it was thus then capable in the channel's body of expressing our energy up to about 3%. On average now, we are expressing about 5% of our total energy.
Intense. Intense. Get yourself ready, Daryl.
So we're looking at a picture of Daryl.
Gotta eat good fiber before you channel, I think. Make sure your colon's cleaned out.
Daryl's baseline EEG. And what I've done is to record Daryl's baseline when he is not channeling and compare that to his EEG when he is channeling.
Sure.
Now here is a picture of Daryl's raw EEG, baseline again, in which we see a very rounded and rhythmic dominant frequency, we call it, in the posterior cortex or the back of the head.
Right, that's going to be important for later. Remember that, posterior cortex.
And this is a good finding, it's a positive finding, because it tells us that Daryl's nervous system is stable, and also that he has what we call good thalamocortical functioning. And this is a...
You know, whenever I'm on a first date, I always like to tell potential partners, like, you may not be aware of this, but I have pretty good thalamocortical functioning. I want you to know, most people flex biceps. I flex my thalamocortical functioning. Yes.
is a common feature, a characteristic that is found in individuals who are peak performers. So here we have a picture of what disconnect.
That's also true. That's also true. Okay, maybe I'll jump ahead a little bit. I'm going to show you something. EEG of a person experiencing hypnosis. So what you'll see, light or deep sleep EEG patterns. Let me find a good picture here. What you're going to see inside of a person's brain, the brain in hypnosis. Yes. Okay, here we go. When you look at this, you'll be able to see like the same rear regions of the brain are going to activate. And we know this about hypnosis. So like hypnosis is an altered brain state, right? The brain is functioning differently. And what we notice is that when a person is awake, there's a lot of functioning up here in the like prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is all your logic and conscious thought. But when you start to go to sleep, you get a lot of activity here. You also get a lot of activity here when you are experiencing hypnosis. And so this is when you're connecting more inside yourself, you're channeling, maybe we can call it channeling. What I would say is your subconscious, right? Because all these things back here, these parts of the brain are operating autonomously. They're operating by themselves. The front part of the brain takes a lot of conscious brain energy. And so that's where we get all of our dreams. That's where we get all of the spontaneous images from hypnosis. That's where we get a lot of the self-discovery because we're going inside and we're connecting these regions of the brain. Now, it's also the reason that you'll see people with lots of excitement, a lot of brain activity here are high performers because it means they're very integrated, right? Their systems are stable. They're having a lot of subconscious activity. And it's that subconscious activity that's very intuitive, very good at keeping the body and the mind integrated as we're making our decisions. And so like a lot of CEOs, a lot of high performers, a lot of athletes where it takes a lot of like, I'm strategizing on the court and I'm also like deeply connected with my body and the intuition of what I need to do next. You see a lot of activity here. So my big gripe and my big contention with this is how do we know that this is channeling and not just sort of the spontaneous verbalizations that we see when someone's sleepwalking or sleep talking, or when they're experiencing hypnosis? Because people talk to me all the time on my couch. I mean, I'm in my clinical office here. And so people will talk to me when they're in a hypnotic trance. And I do that on purpose to help them sort of resolve trauma. I wouldn't say that's an extraterrestrial. I'd say that's them. But let's see what Daryl's got to say here.
Next, when Daryl begins to channel. And you can see the areas in blue, the functional Brodmann areas, we call them, that are not used when he is channeling. And it appears that he disconnects from his personal sense of self.
Right.
He disconnects from the experience of pain.
Hypnosis.
Now, what increases when he begins to channel is, first of all, his processing speed.
Yeah.
And processing speed is a very interesting phenomenon because what happens is it develops early in childhood.
I love this infographic. I'm sure that's exactly what she's looking at when she's looking at his brain.
And by about the
Suggestive, right? Suggestive is showing like, oh, this is high-tech stuff we're dealing with here. This is real. So like, oh, well, we're looking past the suggestions here.
age of 5 or 6, and certainly 9 or 10 maximum, we reach a set point.
Yes.
And this set point doesn't usually change during the lifetime. And in Daryl's case, it actually went up when he began to channel. And it increased when he listened. The actual frequency of the processing speed was tuned to an exact frequency all over the brain.
The set point is stable and rarely fluctuates over the lifespan, but when Daryl channels, it changes in minutes. I would argue that's the same in hypnosis. No, let's do a little. What frequency does the brain reach when in hypnosis? Oh, so it does get up to 11 hertz. Theta waves are present during hypnosis. This is interesting. The normal waking state is characterized by beta waves with frequencies between 14 and 30 hertz. Alpha waves with frequencies between 8 and 13 hertz are associated with relaxed states, daydreaming, and light meditation. And so that's what I'm kind of arguing here. Theta state, I think it's a little bit weird to say that like he's achieving like better brain processing. There's just different frequencies of waves inside of the brain, and each frequency of wave does something different. It's like tuning your radio. You know, those are different radio wave frequencies. It's not that like 107.7 is processing faster than 98.5. Those are two local radio stations in Orlando. It's not processing any faster. It's just a different frequency. So he's tuning into that frequency. And those different frequencies in the brain do different things. And so with hypnosis, we do take a person down to a slower frequency. That's why our cadence as hypnotherapists is much slower and much more calm, because we want to hit right between that theta and alpha state, right? Which is where we see the brain coning down, right? From normal waking, 14 to 30 hertz, down into the alpha state, which is pre-sleep. We don't want to go all the way to theta per se, because that's when you're having REM sleep or you're actually asleep, right? So I don't want someone to fall asleep on my couch. I want to keep them right in that sort of alpha zone so they can connect both with some of their consciousness and learn some of the things that we're teaching in hypnosis, but also connect with that deeper, more primal part of the self, which is at the 4 to 7.5 hertz. I wouldn't say it's faster processing. It's just like faster waves, which is just a different tune. But let's look a little more at the findings. Let's see what the findings were.
A EEG scan of your brain
While I was channeling.
while you were channeling.
Yes.
And there were different states of
Brainwave.
delta brain
Yeah.
waves. Can you describe a little bit about what those different states are?
Okay, I'm
that's
curious
what
here.
we were really excited about doing that, because it's really not so much about trying to prove that Bashar is real, because I can't do that.
Right.
What we did demonstrate scientifically.
You know, and I love that, right? Like, whether Bashar is real or not, like, I think that the things that Daryl is saying through Bashar can be very, very helpful. Like, I'm not against that stuff. I mean, I think we look to like monks or people who are really good at meditation or spiritual leaders because they have this sort of fluid connection, this altered state of consciousness that they access, and so it gives a new perspective. But I think that's the problem for me, is like selling all your belongings or taking radical changes in your life just because some guy named Daryl channels Bashar. I think is very dangerous. And two things. One, I think that it reduces our trust in ourselves, right? And above everyone, you should trust your own judgment. Like, be open to changes and suggestions, but, you know, don't forsake yourself in the process of trying to grow better. You need to move yourself into being healthier. And so, like, taking some of this insight, like, we take a lot of like Zen Buddhist meditations and like integrate those into our lives with great success, because there's a wonderful perspective that we can add to our day-to-day life that makes us better and healthier. So I love that he's saying, I can't prove that Bashar is real scientifically. And that's not the point. I love that. I don't think it is the point. I think if this is helpful to you and Bashar says something that resonates with you and is helpful to guide you, that's great. It's very similar to like a pastor on Sunday morning if you're in a Christian church, or, going to synagogue on a Saturday and learning some things and like listening to what resonates from the readings and the scriptures of that day, or the holy texts of the day, to get your life back in order. Like, that's great. I think what I worry about the most is people worrying about being possessed by a demon, because that's just not a helpful suggestion. And then two, people forsaking their own like judgment in lieu of just trusting the channeling of some other person. Like, the things that Bashar is going to say to Daryl are going to be specific for Daryl, because I do believe that it's, if you want to call it higher consciousness, that's great. I call it the subconscious. It's just this like greater human intuition, which is the point and what I teach in hypnotherapy.
Can't do that.
Right.
What we did demonstrate scientifically, I think probably for the first time that I'm aware of, is that the channeling state is a true altered state.
Great.
And so the EEG readouts were definitely demonstrating that a lot of unusual things are going on in the brain.
I wouldn't say it's unusual.
When people are in a channeling state. And channeling is a natural thing all of us do.
I agree.
Whenever anyone is truly...
If we're calling channeling just like hypnotic state, a state that we get in right before we go to sleep, it is very natural. We all do it every day.
Following their passion, they're not experiencing the passage of time.
Yes.
You're probably in a channeling state, which is, as we discovered in the EEG test, between 40 and 100 cycles per second in the brain, which is a state called gamma. And in that state, some unusual things are happening. One of the most unusual we found was when people are growing up and their brain starts absorbing information, it goes to a certain frequency point and it generally stops. And that's called the set point in the brain. And what that means is your brain is kind of like taking snapshots of reality at a certain rate. Now, mine in general was 9 hertz, 9 frames per second.
I think the comparison to 9 frames per second doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm going to need a little bit more there, Daryl. What I do think is that as the brain is developing, we process things and they get set at certain points, right? Like what you process at 6, typically you don't go back and reprocess unless something happens, like a trauma, right? So it's like we got to go back and it's like, well, I was told that if I wear my seatbelt, I'm safe, but I had that car accident while I was wearing a seatbelt. So now that thing that I learned at 6, I'm now struggling with, right? I need to relearn this type of thing. And that's where we get this reprocessing of trauma idea that we use in mental health counseling all the time. It's not that you're processing the world slowly at like 9 frames per second. It just doesn't make sense. It's just the frequency that the brain is communicating in, because the brain communicates at many different frequencies, and each frequency performs a very specific function, just like tuning of a radio.
Which is a typical amount of, rate of absorption.
Okay.
That set point is, according to our science and everything we know about brain science up to this point, is not supposed to change over the course of your lifetime. And certainly, if it ever did change, it would have to take place over a long period of time or be instigated by some sort of brain trauma or some major thing that would happen to the brain to change that set point.
Right.
I'm gonna have to look a little bit more into that. I mean, I think we can change our frequency by tapping into different states, like sleeping, being awake, watching a movie, hypnosis, meditation.
But what we discovered is that when I go into the channeling state, it changes in seconds and goes from 9 to 10 to 11 to wherever it needs to go to represent whatever it is he's either doing in terms of sending information through or listening to the information someone else is asking him about.
I think this is where you see a lot of the speaking in tongues in religion, like where people get these like prophecies. You'll see that a lot, the speaking in tongues. I mean, they're tapping into just a hypnotic state, which religious services are very much designed to enter somebody into a hypnotic state. That's why you see some interesting things kind of happen, some like seemingly unnatural type of things. But I don't think that they're unnatural. I just think in our Western culture, we don't meditate very often.
And it actually goes higher when he's listening than it does when he's talking.
Oh, interesting.
And so one of the things the technician
Right.
Took from that was that there is a higher focus, a higher concentration of attention given to when he is actually listening to someone talk, because he's assessing all of the things that are going on in that statement in terms of their emotional level, in terms of the real intention behind asking the question, and many other aspects.
It doesn't make sense to me. Like, let's go back to it. So we saw that, let's go here. Okay, so we saw that, like, the normal waking state is up here, brain waves, 14 to 30 hertz, relaxed state, 8 to 13 hertz, and then the lower, the closer to sleep you get, you're kind of down in your more subconscious kind of space. And so, like, if you think about it, like, when he's listening, he's actually just becoming more conscious, right? And so he's coming out of himself, activating a little bit more of the conscious type of frequencies to listen, and then going back down into the unconscious state. And you can kind of see that here, that yes, more higher states like beta waves or alpha waves can get up to the like 11, 12 hertz range, but then he goes back inside of himself and he goes closer to the hypnosis stage, right? So he's focusing outwards and then focusing inwards. He's changing his focus. I don't think that it's more like intensity, right? He's just changing, like, I'm using a little bit more of my consciousness to process what you're saying because my linguistic centers are in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, so I'm activating that piece a little bit more.
So there was that. One other unusual thing was there is a portion of everyone's brain that is responsible for processing your personality.
Sure, yeah.
So that you can express yourself as the person you are. During the channeling state, that portion of the brain shuts off completely.
Oh.
So who's talking?
Right. So your personality is gone.
My personality is gone during that.
Sure, but like, doesn't that kind of lend itself credence to what we do as trauma hypnotherapists, right? Is like the set personality that you believe that you are, we sort of let go of that and we entertain other ways of living that can kind of overcome the trauma because we get stuck inside of that trauma. So yeah, like, it's to me, it feels like more evidence for the hypnosis of like, yes, this is why hypnosis works. We kind of regress to this frequency, this state. We reprocess our personality. We come out different, more functional, more healthy, so we can overcome these stucknesses.
That state. And there are many other things that are happening, including a very heightened sense of connectivity. See, a lot of people think it's actually a trance state. It's not a trance state.
Okay.
It's a state of heightened connection. So that more associations are being made.
But how is that different from a trance state? We know that more associations happen when we're in REM sleep, which is a similar frequency to hypnosis, which is similar frequency to this channeling that he's talking about. To me, that doesn't seem any different. He's trying to make them sound different, but they sound, at least from my understanding, like my education, those seem the same. I would love to know your comments down below. Like, am I totally off here? I don't see it.
More connections are being made faster. And so there is a higher rate of processing information, organizing information, and delivering information.
Yes.
From a very, very precise
Flow state.
high-level frequency.
We know this. This is flow
So
state.
many different things we were able to demonstrate are happening in the channeling state that are highly unusual.
Is this something you're going to continue to research?
I don't know if I'd say highly unusual. He just said that we all do it.
Yeah, we will. We'll look for other ways to, get that data.
Nice.
As well.
Yeah, looking forward to validating this special.
Yeah, well, again, as a...
I love that. Well, and so he's like, I'm looking forward to validating this. Me too. Listen, I'm not against it. I'm just naturally a skeptic. And I love that we're surrounded by a community of people who believe different things and we can talk about this stuff. So let me know in the comments down below what you think about this channeling stuff. If you got a weird channeling thing or something weird you want to see me react to, let me know. Give me a link. I'll review it and give you my 2 cents. Until then, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.